The weirdest thing was a whole octopus, a whole rotting octopus, and I would say, stretched out it would have been, a good 5 to 6 foot long.
On the streets of Avondale.
Yes, yeah, that was bizarre.
Kia ora, I'm Alexia Russell, and today on The Detail we're talking rubbish. Let me rephrase that. We're asking why rubbish bins are disappearing from the streets of Auckland, how much money is being saved by the move, and if it's worth it.
Where are all the rubbish bins? Locals are asking. As part of Auckland Council's bin optimisation drive, they plan to eventually remove 30% of the region's public rubbish bins and save ratepayers at least $9 million.
If you want to be tidy Kiwis, you need to have the infrastructure there to collect it. So, you can understand the council wanting to be efficient with its expenditure, but it seems like they've got the balance wrong.
Devonport locals, as one example, they're irate. Where do we put all the dog poos and fish and chip wrappers now? They're all saying.
Well, it's just the unpleasant thing to be carrying around a bag of poo for half an hour, right? When there's not enough bins around to put them.
My partner has a Keep New Zealand Beautiful t-shirt. And I laughed when she walked in the other day wearing it, because one of the parts of the emblem is a person putting the rubbish into a bin. And that's becoming redundant because there ain't no bins.
This is Avondale rubbish picker-upper, plogger if you prefer, Jason Valentine Burt. He's also a former school principal and has enough knowledge of child behaviour to know that expecting them to walk to a bin 100 metres away is about 100 steps too far.
So I live about 200 metres from 2 schools, and there's just over 3,000 pupils go to those schools. And
so that's Avondale College as well.
That's Avondale College, Avondale Intermediate, yeah. So I'm right there on on Victor Street, near to where they are. And before bin optimisation, between the dairies and the bakeries up the road where the kids get their kai on the way to school, between there and school, we had 5 rubbish bins. Now we've got one rubbish bin. So that isn't a 30% optimisation, that's an 80% optimisation. In what is an area where we really do need all those bins.
But children nowadays, surely they'll just crumple up their little paper bag and put it in their school bag, and when they get home they'll put it in their own rubbish.
Yeah, I call that utopia.
As a former school principal, is that behaviour likely?
Yeah, no, that's very unlikely. Shoot me for saying it, but actually the school strike for climate generation don't actually appear to be paying much attention to their immediate environment, because there's rubbish everywhere, and the go-to is to on the way from school just drop it on the ground.
Jason is, by his own admission, deeply invested in this whole bin optimisation situation. His rubbish-picking-up community group, Clean Avondale, is just about ready to toss it all away because the litter problem's become overwhelming since the bins disappeared.
The council have said that they have selected underutilised rubbish bins. And I mean, to me, that's just a nonsense because, there's times when the bins nearest to me, I've actually taken my wheelie bin over and lifted stuff off the top that's overflowing and put it into my wheelie bin and wheeled it back home again for the rubbish, just so it isn't blowing around the street.
But that's the thing, isn't it? Maybe they should have taken all the bins away, because if you've got a bin that's full, the kids will keep putting stuff in there, and the pizza boxes on top and the drink bottles around the bottom. What if they just took everything away? Then they'd either have to make a conscious decision to throw it in the road or take it home.
Yeah. And I think that on the road would probably win.
Some local boards have bucked this move, opting to fund the current level of their bins until the community can have a say.
Well, 4 local boards have taken matters into their own hands to keep their public rubbish bins. This is after Auckland Council opted to remove more than 1,000 bins. The council is removing 3,000 bins across the city, but there are some pockets where they are staying as is for now.
Waste, rubbish dumping and fly tipping is something that Manarewa struggles with as a ward, and the last thing that we need in an area struggling with how it looks and people's perceptions of it is to see rubbish in and amongst areas that are either hard to get to, which a number of these bins were deemed as being.
Matt Winiata says his area gets 790 calls about dumped waste every month. That works out to be close to 30 every day, and they need the bins. It does mean money is lost from other areas, though.
We do pride ourselves on what we can try and help the community with, but it certainly cuts into that budget when we're struggling to replace costs with the bins. We have to jump in or dive into Parks budget.
Papakura, Franklin and Rodney are the other areas that have voted to fund their bins through their community board budgets. I asked Taryn Crew, Auckland's General Manager for Parks and Community Facilities, why the council chose this core service for cost cuts.
Essentially behind that is savings that we're looking to fund for ratepayers across Auckland. So as part of the annual budget process, the governing body looked at a number of different options around savings, and this bin optimisation was one of the options that we put forward and was approved by them for implementation. Essentially it's saving $9.5 million over 8 financial years, so it's roughly $1.4 million per annum. Of operational expenditure savings, but also it lessens our cost in terms of bin replacements and renewals further down the line as well. So the eventual cost is actually more.
$1.4 million a year might seem like small beer to an organisation as big as Auckland Council, but it has a $325 million gap between its income and operating expenses, and it's $40 million short to fund storm-related costs from last year. The council's reached into areas that councils only do when things are really tight. It's selling its airport shares, for example. And it's shaving $125 million off its operating costs, acknowledging that this will impact on services, even the basic services such as rubbish collection.
Over the last couple of years, we've been looking at different areas of our maintenance contracts to look at what are some of the initiatives where we could reduce service that doesn't have a huge significant impact on levels of service. And so this was a particular area where we realised over time we've got some park areas that are very low number of visitor numbers. So feedback from contractors that they would ordinarily get to those bins, there'd be very little rubbish. And so they were emptying bins on a daily basis. Which didn't really need to be emptied. We've also got instances where you can walk along a stretch of road or park area, and you might be walking past a couple of bins every 10 or 20 metres. And so in those instances as well, we realised that there were actually too many bins put into one particular area, and also through development, bins added in particular areas where it ended up in excess. So it was one particular area that we had thought across the maintenance areas, not wanting to reduce maintenance that would have a significant impact on the community. This was an area where we didn't think there would be.
And what's the sort of feedback that you've had?
Yeah, so the feedback has been interesting. I know there's been a fair amount of interest around the removal, but in fairness, we've been tracking the level of complaints. So we've had just over 100 complaints so far. We've removed around 1,900 odd bins to date. So the level of complaints across Auckland is actually quite small. We've got particular areas. It seems to be more localised. So it'll be a number of complaints about a particular park and group of the community who want to see their bin put back into the park, and so we're working through those instances. But we've got a number of local board areas where there's actually been no complaints at all and no increase in litter or any of those type of behavioural activities. So
where you've had the complaints centred on, is that an indication that perhaps the contractors underestimated the use of that bin?
It's been a bit mixed, to be honest. So in some cases we have identified a bin's been taken away and that's not been the correct bin, and so we've worked to rectify that. In many cases it's just there's a lot of noise because there's a particular bin that somebody used to use maybe on their daily walk, for instance. And so it's still a small group of people, not a large group of people, but has gained quite a lot of interest in that space.
I think one of the big things, of course, is dog walkers.
Yep.
Because who wants to carry a stinky little plastic bag full of poo home with them? Has that been one of your big complainers?
I wouldn't say the biggest, but there has been a fair bit of comment. There has been some comments from dog walkers. But I mean, I would say I'm a dog owner. So, when I go out, I tend to take my dog mess back with me home if there's no bins around. And if I look around, majority of dog owners do. You often see people walking around with their little bags. But I think there is, it has obviously generated a little bit of let's just say poor behaviours around people dumping their mess in other people's bins, or we've heard of instances of people chucking it in trees or in waterways and stuff, and that's not great. I mean, that's not the most responsible thing to do. But I come back to, if there wasn't a bin there in the first place, then what were people doing beforehand? Because we have many areas that don't have bins. But for me, I look around and I think most people are hopefully being responsible, wanting to look after our areas and not create a mess unnecessarily.
Because I live right next to Shepherd's Park, and you wouldn't believe the number of times I have seen a little plastic bag full of poo up a tree.
Yeah.
Oh, that's disgusting, isn't it?
It is disgusting. And I share your sentiments, because I know on my local community page, we've often got people, I've caught you on camera, and I've seen you dumping your waste in my bin. So I think it happens in different areas, but I think it's a small bunch of dog owners. I don't think it's the majority of dog owners, otherwise we'd see a lot more little bags hanging all over the place. Thankfully we don't.
Would it be better for those people who just obviously cannot be bothered taking it home to have let their dog poo in the bush?
No, definitely not. That'll cause a whole raft of other problems. I think being a dog owner comes with certain responsibilities, so I don't think it's unreasonable to expect people to pick it up. And as I say, generally if you're walking your dog in your own neighbourhood, quite often you wouldn't walk past a public litter bin anyhow. So and all of those people tend to clear up their own mess. So I don't think it's reasonable others should too.
Although parks would be the exception, wouldn't it? I mean, if you're doing a circuit of a park, you kind of hope you'd leave your
and some of our parks will still have bins. So many of our destination parks and also our dedicated dog parks, we've left bins there. So for those areas where we know people will travel to and spend a fair bit of time, we're making sure that those bins are still available for use.
Now talk to me, speaking of parks, about places like Long Bay, the former regional parks, don't have bins at all. What has happened there since those bins were removed?
Yeah, so that network, so all of our regional parks and also in fact our local board area, Aotea, Great Barrier, don't have any public bins. And across the regional parks, those bins were taken away more than 20 years ago. Chatting to some of my team who've been here for some time, they recall the outcry and the community interest, I suppose, around removal of those bins and the concern it would create a whole lot more litter. But Long Bay, as you mentioned, that's over 1 million visitors a year, and we don't have a huge amount of rubbish. Yes, we will get a little bit of loose litter. You get the people who don't care as much as the environment as others, and so they might leave some litter behind, and so our rangers and contractors pick up loose litter. But on the whole, most families will go in, pack out, and take their rubbish home with them.
And that's just a change in thinking, isn't it? I mean, like trampers, pack in, pack out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is. I mean, it's something we're trying to share, the pack in, pack out principle. Not dissimilar to, I've been to some parks, even with my own family, and you go for fish and chips at the beach and you rock up to the bin and it's full. Do you just try shove it in or chuck it next to it, or
everybody
do you take
just
it home?
shoves it in? I mean, the pizza box is stacked on the top, the beer cans around the bottom. I mean, this is a double-edged sword with bins, isn't it?
It is. I tend to take it home, but that might be just me because I feel bad, right? Yeah. So, but it is that principle of, if you brought it with you, can you not take it home if there's not a place to dispose? So that's what we're trying to encourage Aucklanders to do, and still be respectful of other people using the space, and also not wanting to create litter and issues for our environment.
Was there any consideration given to launching a Keep New Zealand Beautiful, Be a Tairi Kiwi type campaign ahead of this move?
It's a good question, and in hindsight, looking back, could we have done more? As I said, most of the feedback and the responses that we're getting, or the complaints that we're getting, are quite localised. They're not widespread, and so I suppose it's that fine line about having too much out there around expectations and what we would normally expect, but it has been quite localised complaints. It hasn't been about the program as a whole, and like I said, in some local board areas, not a single complaint.
When you look at those localised complaints, do you sort of go there and think, okay, yes, all right, we made a mistake, we've taken too many bins away, the kids are throwing their chupa-chup sticks and drink bottles all over the show between the dairy and the school? What happens in a situation like that? Are you prepared to say, okay, we just got this one wrong, we'll put some bins back?
So we're monitoring it at the moment, and as part of our full facility maintenance contractors, our contractors, part of their clean-up requirements is to pick up loose litter. So when they go to the parks, whether they're cleaning the toilets, cutting the grass, etc., they do need to be on the lookout for any loose litter, and what we've asked them to do is monitor areas to see whether there is truly a sustained uplift in litter. To be fair, we've got some behaviours where people are dumping it to make a point, and we hope that over time will stop. But we've also got areas where we have loose litter issues, and actually we've got multiple bins in that area. So sometimes, as we spoke before, it's a bit of a behaviour thing rather than just the absence of bins. So we're continuing to monitor those, and if we do find that in a particular area there's a need for that bin to go back, then we'll work out what the option is.
Well, what might the options be in that case?
Well, it could be putting a bin back. If we've got it wrong, we're not afraid to say we might have got something wrong. I can guarantee you it won't be 2,500 bins wrong. So that's where we just have to keep monitoring and working out whether there are other options for that community. Is it an education piece, or is it about putting something back?
Because I spoke to one ex-principal who said, if kids have to go, basically 100 metres out of their way to go to a bin, that's 100 steps too far for them. They won't do it. Have you looked at schools in particular, especially ones where there is a dairy or a bakery nearby?
So generally in front of shop centres and town centres, we haven't removed bins unless, like I say, we've got some areas where you literally walk in, it might be 10 metres apart from one bin to the next. So, and where that's not necessary, then a bin might have been removed, but it really does depend on the foot traffic, on how much how much litter's been collected in that area. But kids are a good example. They can sometimes drop their litter whether there's a bin or not. So
well, and they walk, they buy their pie, they walk, they finish their pie, they throw.
Yeah. I mean, I'd like to think that that's part of what we do to educate our children and those generations around, being tidy, being responsible, and taking litter with us. So, I think it just needs constant effort.
I mean, we're talking their drink bottles, their drink cans, chupa-chups, the chupa-chup sticks and wrappers is a big favourite, pie wrappers. It's going into people's hedges. I've got hedges around my place, and I periodically go along, and there's their rubbish just jammed into the hedge. I pull out my rubbish, or up on top of the hedge, or wherever there doesn't seem to be a care. To be honest.
Is rubbish your bugbear, or is children your bugbear?
No, rubbish is my bugbear. Yeah, no, having worked in education for 25 years, I loved it. But I also understand the young psyche, I guess,
behaviour
as well, the behaviour of children. And yes, in a utopia, they would all put it into a bin. They would all carry on walking onto school with their empty chippy packet or whatever and put it in the bins at the school.
Do you have a sort of group or anything that goes around and helps tidying up, or are you a lone ranger?
No, we've got what I would call is a small community initiative that we have, which is called Clean Avondale. Our Facebook group is Avondale Let's Clean Up Our Act, and basically we're all about encouraging people to do the right thing. So we're kind of reinforcing that whole be a tidy Kiwi, keep New Zealand beautiful message in Avondale. You know, we encourage people to go plogging, which is, you know, walking or running and picking up rubbish. We've actually put it on hold at the moment because there's so much rubbish out there that actually to go out plogging, like I used to go plogging every morning, now there's just an excess amount of rubbish. And before, when I'd go out plogging, obviously you'd fill a bag, you know, like the supermarket carry bags, the paper ones. You know, you'd fill one of those, you'd come up to a council rubbish bin and you'd dump it off in there and get out another bag and off you'd go again. That option's now gone, obviously. So, and we can't take all that rubbish home because we would fill our own red-topped wheelie bin from council pretty damn smartly, I'd say, within 2 to 3 days. You know, we would fill a bin. And we've got obviously our own stuff as well at home.
So this initiative by the council is actually, in a lot of ways, self-defeating.
It is. I mean, you know, ours is an example of one community initiative that, you know, was really wanting to help the situation and to do the right thing. And through council's actions, we've put it on hold. And I'm battling with council to actually get some bins put back into our area, so that we can reinitiate things and get going on it again. But so far, the council's response has been, we're not going to get any of the bins that we removed back out of storage and put them back. We'll find some bins in another area of Auckland and move them into yours. And I'm saying, no, that's not fair, because that's going to further disadvantage another area of Auckland just for us to have rubbish bins. Just take some bins back out of storage that you've taken away.
Rubbish, roads, rates, the three core businesses of a council. Did you feel a bit irked when you were told to make some big cuts in this area?
Well, it's if we think it's big, I suppose, is the first question. So yes, it is one of the core services, but I suppose rubbish as a whole, so household rubbish as well as public litter bins, are still maintain, you know, we had over 10,000 litter bins across the city. We've still got over 7,000 litter bins across the city. So there is still quite a significant service. You know, there are some local parks that have no bins at all, and then you've got other local parks that have one bin. So I've been asked the question whether I think there's room for more. There could be into the future. It depends on the appetite of people wanting to push that a little bit further. So yeah, it's not, I wouldn't say it's a significant change at all. I think it's a reduction in the service level that we had. I think maybe it's just because people are quite passionate about the spaces they use. And, you know, if they've used something regularly on a daily basis or every weekend and you take it away and they didn't know it was going to be taken away, then that comes as a shock. But hopefully through a lot of the messaging, through people realising the savings that are being saved through this initiative, which are significant for ratepayers, and, you know, without those savings, we'd be putting rates up more and more. No one wants that either. So I think it's just the nature of some of our services are very much in the face of people. It's real, it's something they use day to day. But hopefully, as I said, through the messaging, we help them understand that there's a balance we're trying to achieve.
Why are you so obsessed with rubbish? What bothers you about it?
What bothers me about it? I just think we live in such an amazing country. You know, I love Aotearoa, New Zealand, and you know, I love it looking great. And, you know, pride. I want to see pride in our communities.
Meanwhile, Jason points out that you can get a plogging stick from Mitre 10 for $16 if you want to do your bit for the environment and get your walking steps in at the same time. And if you're one of those people who throws their plastic bags of poop into a tree, just don't. That's all for today. Thanks to Jason Valentine-Burt and Taryn Crew. This episode was engineered by Rangi Powick and produced by Gwen McClure and Davina Zimmer. And I'm Alexia Russell. The detail is supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. Mā te wā.